The Plainsfield UFO sightings, as they are referred to by enthusiasts of 14 phenomena, occurred during the summer of 1998 and, perhaps unsurprisingly, took place in the farming community of Plainsfield, California. Plainsfield was, and still is, a very small settlement, with perhaps a couple hundred residents at most, and an hour-and-a-half drive to the nearest large town. This perhaps accounts for the unusual degree of obscurity that the sightings have enjoyed over the decades. Though some of the more paranoid students of UFO folklore insist that information surrounding the incidents was purposefully suppressed by the federal government. The subsequent documents represent countless hours of research into the unusual happenings of that summer and should conceivably display a clear timeline of events. Newspaper clipping from the Thompson County Tribune, July 8, 1998. Earthquake leaves huge sinkhole in Plainsfield. This past week, the sleepy town of Plainsfield received a quite rude awakening courtesy of a series of hereto unprecedented earthquakes. At approximately 4:30 p.m. on Sunday, July 5th, Plainsfield residents experienced a series of intense tremors lasting about 15 minutes. There was minor damage to some buildings and a handful of temporary power outages. But more striking was the surprise found by the local farmer, Theodore Albertson. "It was like nothing I've ever felt in all my years of living here," says Albertson, 57. "It was real odd. The ground kind of pulsated all rhythmically. You ever see one of those kids with a subwoofer and they've got the volume cranked all the way up, so you feel the buzz in your bones? It was like that, but everywhere, and without the sound. Just a feeling of shaking, pulsating like a heartbeat. Anyway, after all the rumbling was finished, I went out to the field to check to make sure none of the fences collapsed, only to find this massive hole. Must be over 100 feet across at least. I can't really get a good look at the bottom. It's like it's at an angle or something, so the shadows cover it up, but it looks really deep." Theodore has expressed some interest in turning the hole into a tourist attraction, but some Plainsfield residents have expressed doubts as to its profitability. "I don't see what's so interesting about a great big hole in the ground," says Rebecca Carlton, 65. "Besides, just being near it makes me feel sick. And if I look down there for too long, it sets off my tinnitus something awful. Lord knows why. If you ask me, he ought to get it filled up with cement." Statement of Jessica May, mailed to the California Unidentified Flying Object Society, July 10th, 1998. "To whom it may concern, I was out stargazing in my backyard last night and I experienced something most unusual. There's not too much light pollution around here, thanks to it being so remote, so you can really get a good look at the Milky Way. I was peering through my telescope when I noticed something odd. There was a star that shouldn't be there, just under the Big Dipper. Now, of course, I double-checked my star charts. These things don't just appear out of nowhere, but try as I might, I couldn't find anything that corresponds to it. I was starting to get a bit excited. I mean, who gets a chance to find a whole new star? But before I could go put a call into the nearest university, the damn thing moved. Now, I don't want you thinking I'm just some nitwit farm girl who's never seen a plane before. I mean, this star was sitting completely still one moment, And then the next, it was rushing around like some sort of whirlgig. Couldn't have been a helicopter either. There wasn't any sound of whirring or anything like that. Anyway, I watched it bounce around the sky for a bit, hardly knowing what to think, until eventually it started coming towards me. Now I'd assumed this thing was real high up, since I couldn't hear anything at all, but it must have only been a couple thousand feet at the highest. As it got closer, I saw more of a definite form to it, and I swear on my life, it was saucer shaped. Now, I didn't really get a good look at the thing. I was so panicked I bolted back inside, leaving my telescope behind in my rush. There was a bright light, like a searchlight, and then it passed over the house. I remember it was headed over in the direction of the Albertson place. When I finally calmed myself down and went back outside to get my telescope, the thing was gone. I felt nauseated, and I remember dry heaving a bit, but I can't tell if that wasn't just from the stress of the whole ordeal. In any event, I figured you ufology folks would be interested. Newspaper clipping from the Thompson County Tribune, July 15th, 1998. Flying saucer sighted in Plainsfield. Still recovering from the unusual earthquake that occurred earlier this month, the little town of Plainsfield is once again flung into the spotlight with yet another strange event. Multiple residents have reported seeing a strange light in the sky after night, which some have claimed is none other than a spacecraft of extraterrestrial origin. People don't like the phrase flying saucer, says Jessica May, 23. But if you ask me, there isn't a more apt description. It's not a case of mistake identity with a weather balloon or something like that. Theodore Albertson, 57, says, "Darn thing keeps appearing in the sky every night. It wouldn't be so bad, really. But then, after it's all done with its zipping and zooming, it comes down in my field. Not landing in my field, mind, but it goes down that sinkhole left over from the earthquake. Call me crazy, I don't mind, but I bet there's some sort of secret base down there or something. I'd go down there and check, but the angle of the pit is much too steep at my age." Skeptics have claimed that the event is a hoax, or perhaps even a public stunt. Rebecca Corton, 65, a neighbor of Albertson, says, "I bet Teddy just got one of them remote controlled toy helicopters and tied a flashlight to it or something. Easier to drum up visitors for his weird pit if he makes people think there's a spaceship down there." Letter written by Alejandra Valadez to her sister Felicia Valadez, July 23rd, 1998. Dear Felicia, I'm writing you today because of some very unusual news. Do you recall that old plot of land with the barn on it that I've been trying to sell for the past couple of years? Well, I finally secured a buyer, paid in cash too. The whole thing only took a week or so to get squared away. Now, that in on itself is a bit strange, but the really weird part about all this is who bought it. The gentleman who toured the property said his name was Jupiter 7, and that he represented the Church of Intergalactic Brotherhood. Quite a strange fellow he was, dressed up in a shiny silver suit like something out of one of those science fiction movies I know your husband loves so much, and his head was shaved down bald as an egg. He had a funny little goatee too at the very end of his chin. Now, of course, I got to asking him about his silly name and what on earth the Church of Intergalactic Brotherhood could be. And bless his heart, he was just as polite as he could be. But goodness gracious, was the answer strange. He started talking all this nonsense about how aliens from outer space have been visiting Earth for millions of years, and that all of our religions are just misinterpretations of their visitations. He said that he himself was a reincarnation of one of those aliens, and that's why he changed his name. Now, you know me, Felicia. I'm not one to go judging folks for their faith or lack thereof. But I'll be honest with you, it took a lot of effort to keep from laughing. I managed to keep my sense of decorum for politeness sake, but wow. Anyway, I asked him what he and his so-called church, more of a cult if you ask me, wanted with my barn. And he said that our little town of Plainsfield was in the middle of a visitation from beings from another world. Now, I bet you've already heard about how recently some of my more impressionable neighbors have claimed to see some strange lights up in the sky recently, but I never would have guessed that it would lead to our very own UFO cult. Anyway, the amount this Jupiter character was offering was so generous that I just had to accept, regardless of his attire and beliefs. I signed away the deed later that week, and that was that. Since then, I've seen a few of those CIB fellows gather at the barn, with a bunch of RVs, camper vans and tents set up over there. The folks there seem polite enough, hippie types mostly. They don't really say much when I see them at the general store or around town. There's only about 2 dozen of them or so, Mr. Seven included. Anyway, you ought to stop by sometime. With the money I got from the sale, I've been able to fix up the house a little bit and get a few nice things. I even bought a brand new television and switched over from cable to satellite. There are so many new channels, I don't even know how to keep up. I keep getting interference, something awful though, but only at night. Must be some quirk with the damn thing. With love, Alejandra. Complete letter sent by Alejandra Valedes to a certain television provider, company name redacted, July 24th, 1998. To whom it may concern, I recently switched over to redacted as my television provider, and at first I was thrilled at the wide selection of channels and high picture quality. But I've been having a lot of difficulties at night specifically. Oftentimes I'll be sitting there watching one channel when suddenly it will change to a different one without me doing a thing. Sometimes the whole screen will just become a mess of static with this positively awful shrieking sound. It's gotten to the point that I just have given up watching TV at night. At first I thought maybe it's just that I live in a somewhat remote area, but that doesn't make sense. Why would it only stop working at night? I don't pretend to know much about how television works, but that just doesn't sit right with me. Besides, I see the satellite in the sky at night sometimes, much too bright to be a star. The worst part is that sometimes the static isn't entirely static. There are these blurry half images of what I only can assume are distorted faces, and these weird garbled words in some foreign language. I must be partially picking up some other broadcast. And one more thing, sometimes the TV set will turn on by itself in the middle of the night, And when it does, I always get that weird half broadcast with the faces and the babbling. Please send someone around to fix this issue as soon as possible, otherwise I want a full refund. Sincerely, Alejandra Valdez. Diary entry of Brandon Adams, July 25th, 1998. I don't even know where to start with this. I have to write it down though. I have to get it out of my head, otherwise I feel like I'm going insane. I hope I'm just crazy. I really just want to be crazy. I was out watching The Moving Star last night. The one that's got the whole town worked up and that weirdo church is focused on. It was very strange to watch, to see it just zip around overhead, then stay still, then move somewhere else. It moved like a hummingbird or a bee, but it was completely silent. This went on for a few hours, I guess. Just me sitting in a lawn chair watching the sky. That distant orb of light zooming about overhead. I don't know why I didn't get bored of it. Lord knows it wasn't that interesting. But there was this constant sense that I was seeing something truly out of this world. Something beyond the scope of normal things. My property borders on Pete Richards' place, the cattle rancher. There's no animals dangerous enough around here to threaten a cow, so he just leaves them outside at night. Most of them were just asleep in the field, but a couple were grazing. Insomniacs getting a midnight snack, I suppose. Some of them joined me in looking up at the star that moved. I started noticing that the star was getting bigger, brighter. It took me quite a long time for me to realize it was coming down, falling from the sky like Lucifer expelled from heaven. There was no sound, no hum of extraterrestrial engines. It just got brighter and bigger, till I could see the vague outline, flat and circular, a saucer. Just writing it out makes me feel like a lunatic. Everyone knows there's no such thing as flying saucers. Everyone knows it's just made up stories repeated by idiots who want so desperately to feel less alone in the universe. But that night, the universe seemed to have other ideas about what is and isn't real. As soon as I could see the thing for what it was, I hightailed it to my porch and hid underneath it, scraping my knees a bit. I'm still not sure why I did that instead of just going inside and locking the door. I guess I was worried it would see me through my windows. From underneath the porch, I didn't get too good of a view of the sky above, nor that baleful false star, but I could see Pete's field just fine. I wish I just went inside and hid under the covers until it went away. A bright light, like the warning gleam of a lighthouse, shone down upon a cow in the field, one of the insomniacs. The animal froze instantly, as if it were spontaneously turned to stone. Slowly it began to be lifted by some unseen force off the ground. It didn't struggle, it didn't cry out, but I could see its sides begin to heave in and out quickly, hyperventilating from stress, its eyes widening. Then came the cutting. Thin slices like a surgeon's scalpel, peeling through layers of hide and into flesh beneath. A flap of skin pulled softly by invisible fingers, perfectly precise, as deliberate as calligraphy. And the blood, oh god, the blood. It flowed up and out from the geometrical wound towards the light above, shimmering like rubies. I would have vomited if I could have worked up the strength to move. Organs began to be extracted from the wound, fleshy objects which I couldn't identify. I'll admit I'm a stranger to the butcher's general art. All the while, the cow's eyes spun maddeningly, its breath sharp and swift, but there were no cries, no screams. The other cattle kept their distance, but didn't panic. They seemed more confused and frightened, the total alienness of the present danger not clear to their animal brains. Eventually, the levitating cow's breathing and eye movement ceased, and I knew it was finally quite dead. I watched as a handful of organs and an enormous cloud of crimson ichor were sucked up above my side, until finally, as abruptly as the light appeared, it vanished. The exsanguinated corpse of the cow collapsed to the ground in a heap of pellet flesh. I skithered out from under the porch and got back inside my house. I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep, so I didn't try to. Instead, I just sat on the floor in silence until the morning. I'm going to make some arrangements to stay with friends. I don't want to be in Plainsfield right now. Transcript of a statement given by Robert Herbert, recorded by the Thompson County Sheriff's Department, July 30th, 1998.
I've already told you this. What do you mean I have to go through it again? Just one more time, if you please, Mr. Herbert. Just so we can get it all on tape. Fine, but after this one, I want to go home. Of course, please give us your statement. I was driving back home from the city. I'd been spending a few hours on the road, so it was pretty dark. Something like 10:30 maybe? We got your call at 10:23. Please continue. Anyway, I'm getting a little tired since I've been driving for so long. Nearly dozing off, if I'm being completely honest here. Must have closed my eyes for a second, because all of a sudden there was this pile in the center of the road. God, I don't want to think about it. Please continue. We just need it on tape, then you can go home. Alright, just give me a second. Take your time. I didn't really know what I was looking at first. It was pretty out of it, you know. But I get out of the car to try and get a better idea of what I was seeing. And it was a mound of bodies. About a dozen of them. Human ones. All broken and bent like a pile of puppets with their strings cut. Did you recognize any of them? Not by name, but they were all those cult folks, the Church of Intergalactic Brotherhood, or whatever it's called. It took me a while before I realized one of them was still breathing. A girl, maybe 17, 18, on the top of the rest. She looked like every bone in her body was broken, but she was still alive. Anyway, you know the rest. I called you guys, she was taken over to the hospital, and now we're here. Can I go home now? Give me a moment to talk with the sheriff, but after that you're free to go. Thank you for your time, Mr. Herbert.
Newspaper clipping from the Thompson County Tribune, July 31st, 1998. UFO cold mass suicide leaves 13 dead and 1 injured. Last night, the Thompson County Sheriff's Department identified the bodies of 30 members of the religious movement known as the Church of Intergalactic Brotherhood, an organization that some have characterized as a cult. Authorities have not revealed the cause of death, but are tentatively labeling the event as a mass suicide. The bodies were discovered on a stretch of highway just outside of Plainsfield, apparently in the middle of the road. There is reportedly one survivor of the event, who authorities have identified as Alice Brown, though according to Plainsfield residents, Brown currently goes by the name Venus 5. Brown has not yet awakened since being recovered on top of the 13 dead bodies on the highway, and hospital staff describe her as being in critical condition. The remaining 12 members of the Church of Intergalactic Brotherhood have not been located. The Sheriff's Department investigation into the church compound have turned up no significant leads. According to reports, the site was entirely empty, with a number of vehicles and tenants left behind. The building used by the church as a place of worship, a repurposed barn, is reportedly in extreme disrepair. "It's damn eerie," says Deputy John Higgins. "So far, we have no leads to where they ran off to. The barn they were using as some sort of temple has no clues either. It doesn't make a lick of sense. The roof looks like it was torn off or something. We found bits of smashed wood on the ground nearby. It looks almost like a bomb went off, but there isn't any signs of an explosion. We found some sort of broadcasting equipment in there, but nothing that could explain what on earth blew the darn roof off. The damnedest thing though are the scratches all the way up the side of the wall, like someone was being dragged up and clinging on for dear life. Gives me the willies just thinking about it." Journal entry from Melinda Flanagan, researcher for the Californian Unidentified Flying Object Society, August 1st, 1998. "I arrived in Plainsfield a little past noon. It's a ludicrously tiny town, little more than a main street and a few acres of farmland. It's one of those places that might be completely left off a map and nobody would even notice. I had a conversation with Mrs. May about her UFO sighting in a rundown old diner that looked like it hadn't changed since the mid-50s. The discussion was neither particularly illuminating nor particularly interesting. She didn't tell me anything she hadn't already said in the letter she had previously sent, and when I asked her if she'd seen the object since her initial sighting, she reported that she hadn't, and had in fact been avoiding stargazing since the incident. She claimed that others had seen the UFO as well, but didn't feel comfortable sharing their names with me. Apparently, she was worried that the others might think she was off her rocker if they found out she was talking with people like me. I thanked her for her time and was about to chalk up this whole trip as a huge waste of time before I noticed the headline of an article peering up at me from the newspaper stand next to the door. "UFO called suicide leaves 13 dead, 1 injured." I paid for the newspaper and read it quickly in my car. The article didn't specify which hospital the survivor, Alice Brown, aka Venus 5 according to the article, was being kept at, but a quick peek at my map showed only one nearby, Shaver Memorial Hospital. I gave the hospital a call on the single payphone in the entirety of Plainsfield and put on my best impression of a worried relative. I claimed that Mrs. Brown was a cousin of mine and that I wanted to see her if possible. Fortunately for me, it appeared that she had since woken up from her unconscious state, though they warned me that she seemed far from lucid. I thanked the hospital staff for their time and started the long drive to the hospital. When I arrived, I once again presented myself as Mrs. Brown's cousin and was swiftly escorted to the room in which she was being kept. The nurse who guided me there then left to give us some privacy. She didn't look good. 2 broken legs, cracked ribs, a shattered pelvis, and a fractured arm. IV drips and all manner of wires covering her in a tangled mess like cobwebs. I have no idea how the cops thought something like this could be the result of an attempted suicide. Maybe a jump from a high building, but she was found on the highway in the middle of the flattest landscape I've ever had the displeasure of driving across. "Who are you?" she asked, justifiably confused. "Are you with the police?" I did some quick thinking, trying my best to guess how well she would cooperate with the police. Given what little I knew about her membership in a cult, I figured it maybe wouldn't be the best move. I decided to give her the truth. "No, Venus," I said, purposefully using her chosen name from the church. "I'm with an organization called CUFOs. I wanted to ask you if you remember anything about the night they found you on the highway." "Don't call me that name," she muttered before coughing slightly. "It was all a bunch of crap. They aren't angels or gods or whatever the hell Harold wanted them to be." "Harold?" "The real name of that idiot who called himself Jupiter 7, the guy who ran the Church of Intergalactic Brotherhood. He's probably dead now though." "What happened?" She looked at me for a moment, sizing me up. "You wouldn't believe me," she finally said after a few moments. "Try me, I can guarantee I've heard stranger things." I quietly turned on the tape recorder in my purse, which she didn't seem to notice. With a sigh, she began to tell her story, which I have transcribed below in full. Statement of Alice Brown, abductee. "I joined the Church of Intergalactic Brotherhood because I was lost. I just got out of a bad relationship and didn't really have anywhere to go. I suppose I was going a little crazy, I guess. This guy, Harold though, he preferred to be called Jupiter 7, promised a life of happiness and peace, and helped with giving me a place to stay and food to eat. I guess Harold was independently wealthy or something, some trust fund kid. He had the money to rent or buy properties in places where the weird stuff happened. UFOs, Bigfoot sightings, alleged miracles, you name it. He claimed that those places were where the visitors from the stars have made their mark on the world. Nothing ever really came of it. We'd stay there for a couple of weeks or months, make ourselves pretend we saw something of note, and move on. I believed all this nonsense at the time, of course. We all want to believe in something, whether it be God, aliens, whatever. It just gives us hope. Anyway, Plainsfield was different. Like clockwork, every night we'd see that moving star in the sky, too quick and agile to be a plane or helicopter, dead silent too. And every night it would zip down over at the Albertson property and disappear, like it was landing there or something. Harold made a bunch of offers to buy out Teddy Albertson's land, but it never went anywhere. Eventually he threatened to get a restraining order, and Harold stopped bothering him after that. Harold got this idea in his head that he should try and make contact with the star. He bought a whole bunch of radio equipment and set it up in the barn we used as a church. He'd spent all night fiddling with the frequency, trying to find the right one to commune with the visitors, while we watched that distant ball of light zooming around in silence. One night he called us into the barn and told us that he had made contact. We were all excited, of course, and believed him. You've gotta understand, he convinced all of us that we had some sort of alien soul inside of us, that those things that piloted the UFOs were our kin in some way. To us, this was a big deal, like coming home to your family after years of being away. Harold started turning on their radio equipment and began to speak into a microphone, giving some speech about universal friendship. We waited in the pews patiently while he gave his sermon. Then we felt the rumbling. The ground felt like it was heaving beneath us, and the bright white light started to shine through the gaps in the wooden roof. There was a tinnitus in my ear, and my hair started to stand on end, like someone was rubbing a balloon against it. Then the roof just got clear ripped off, and we saw it. A flying saucer, just like they show in the movies. Gleaming chrome, bright lights, the whole deal. We started to float up into the air, and I don't know exactly what I was expecting to feel, but it wasn't pain. It hurt as we started getting pulled up into the air. It felt like someone had stuck a meat hook in our guts and started tugging. Most of us started crying out. I even saw someone trying to claw his way back to the ground, though he only succeeded in leaving scratches from his fingernails against the barn wall. There was no escaping it. It was stronger than us. Before we knew it, we were inside. It was as dark on the inside as it was bright on the outside. We were in a circular room with metallic walls and no visible doors or windows. Harold tried to calm us down, telling us that we were going to be taken to some sort of utopia and that we should all be grateful. After a few minutes, we all stopped hyperventilating from fear and managed to calm down a bit. It was then that a panel of the wall receded and slid to the side, like some sort of door, but I could have sworn there were no seams when I last looked. Out of that door came a being. Based on what Harold had told us about the beings which visited this planet, I was expecting a tall, beautiful creature shining with radiant light. This was quite the opposite. The room was far too dark to get a good look at it, but it seemed stunted, shriveled even. It stood at about the height of a child and was wearing some sort of greyish uniform. Its bald, nearly featureless head seemed too large for its body. The main thing that I noticed were its eyes, dark, soulless, and unblinking. It waved a thin, stick-like arm in a signal to something behind it, and that same agonizing tugging sensation from before forced us against the wall. We were held in place, completely immobilized and unable to even speak. It walked up to each of us, pulling some sort of device off its hip and pointed it at our heads one by one. When it reached me, I felt an intense burning pain in my skull, like someone was branding my brain. I wanted to cry out, to scream, but I couldn't. It eventually passed over me and moved on to the rest. When it was finally finished, it jabbered something in a language I didn't recognize and pointed to the 12 of us, including Harold. The ones who it pointed at seemed to be released from their paralysis, slumping to their knees. The thing pointed to the doorway where it came from and barked an order of some sort. The ones who were set free from their paralysis began filing out through the doorway in mostly silence, though I think I heard one or two of them swallowing back tears. Finally, that short thing in the uniform exited the room through the same doorway and the wall sealed up behind it. The remaining 14 of us were released from our paralysis, and a few of us began to sob. We didn't know what was going on. Then the floor began to open up. It was like a camera aperture, but slower. We heard metal scrape on metal as we saw a hole in the center of the room expand, revealing the landscape far below. We all clung to the rapidly diminishing edge, screaming to be saved, until finally there was nothing left to cling to. I remember falling, watching the saucer speed away in the distance, rapidly descending towards the Albertson farm. I recall wondering to myself as I fell, time seeming to slow to a crawl. If they're supposed to be from outer space, why do they keep on flying down that sinkhole? That's all I remember before I woke up here. Journal entry from Melinda Flanagan, researcher for the Californian Unidentified Flying Object Society, August 2nd, 1998. After my exciting conversation with Mrs. Brown yesterday, I had to retire to a nearby hotel. The nurses insisted she needed her rest. If what she told me was true, she certainly did. The next day, however, I came across an unusual sight as I pulled into a hospital parking lot. Mrs. Brown was in a stretcher, evidently either sedated or comatose, and being carried into the back of an unmarked black van by two men in suits. I got out of the car quickly and approached the man, asking what they were doing with my cousin. The taller of the two men, bald with a well-kept goatee, turned mechanically towards me and smiled blandly, though I could tell there was no mirth behind the black sunglasses that obscured his eyes. "She's very sick, ma'am. We are taking her to a special facility. She will receive excellent care. Do not be afraid." Those were his exact words. He spoke them with all the warmth and sincerity of a meat grinder. I was dumbfounded as he and his companion finished loading Mrs. Brown into the back of the van. I could have sworn there seemed to be something wrong with the top of the man's head. It looked like a very thin white line around the circumference, but it was far too faint to tell for sure. I tried to protest as they shut the doors to the back of the van and clambered into the front seats, but they acted like I wasn't even there. They drove off and I was left alone in the parking lot with a pit at the bottom of my stomach. I'm heading back home tonight and I hope to God I never have to come back here. Something about those men makes the hair on the back of my neck stand on end just thinking about them. I have a feeling that Alice Brown is gone for good. After the disappearance of Alice Brown, there have been no more UFO sightings in Plainsfield. The sinkhole in Theodore Albertson's field collapsed, seemingly of its own accord, on August 4th, 1998. The location of the 12 missing members of the Church of Intergalactic Brotherhood remains unknown. Certain elements of the incident, such as the unusual earthquake, appearance of the entity encountered by Mrs. Brown, and the bizarre behavior of the man encountered by Mrs. Flanagan, corresponded closely with the Stevensville incident of 1987. but the significance of these similarities is unknown.